Good afternoon. I'm Steve Fisher, Executive Director of the American Great Lakes Ports Association. I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us here today, both live here at the National Museum of the Great Lakes here in Toledo, and also the many people who've joined us today virtually on YouTube. Today's event has been organized by the Great Lakes maritime industry to highlight what is the largest investment in the Great Lakes navigation system in a generation. That is the construction of the $1.4 billion new navigation lock in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Today we will hear from industry leaders who will describe the importance of this project. We'll hear from the Army Corps of Engineers who will brief us on the construction progress, because the project is literally under construction right now. And we will also be unveiling a series of art posters, which we've commissioned to help the public and our stakeholders celebrate this milestone. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the National Museum of the Great Lakes for hosting us here today. And I'd like to first mention who will be presenting in just a moment. Our first speaker will be Mark Barker, President of Interlake Steamship Company. He'll be followed by Mr. Thomas Winston, the
win the war. And again today, this is why we're here, to talk about the importance of this construction that has taken so long to ensure that we replace and build in the resiliency that we need to ensure that our American manufacturing and the 11 million jobs that count on this continue for the future of our country. We as a company, Interlake Maritime Services, I'm the president of, has just launched our first ship in 40 years to help support this system. And this ship was built with iron ore mined in Minnesota, carried through construction, and to hear the update of where we are on this immensely important project up in Sault Ste. Marie, and building a second 1,000-foot lock, and ensuring that we have the resiliency we need and that we can take and get the maintenance done on the existing lock as we bring the new lock online. So thank you for being here today. This is such an incredibly important piece of infrastructure, and it's so important to our nation and to our national security and our economic security that we're able to get this piece of infrastructure built and ensure that we have a strong and domestic and international maritime business and connection to the world. So thank you for being here today, and I'd like to turn it over to Jim Weekly. Oh, no, sorry, Thomas. Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. My name is Thomas Winston, and I serve as President and CEO of the Toledo-Lucas County Port Authority. I'd like to spend just a few minutes to talk about the importance of the locks to Toledo as well as the region. From the perspective of the Port of Toledo, the Soo locks and their reliability are critical to our success. As many of you know, at the beginning of this year, Cleveland Cliffs began operation of the Toledo Direct Reduction Plant, producing high-quality direct reduction iron for the steel industry. This billion-dollar plant is dependent on iron ore shipments from Minnesota due to Soo locks. Similarly, iron ore arrives at Toledo CSX docks, where it is railed to Cleveland Cliffs steelmaking facility in Middleton, Ohio. Just as Toledo is dependent on the Soo, so are many other communities. In 2018, an economic impact analysis determined that more than 123,000 U.S. and Canadian jobs and $22 billion in economic activity are dependent on the Soo locks. In Ohio alone, maritime commerce through the locks support more than 10,000 jobs. In Minnesota, more than 6,000 jobs. In Michigan and in Indiana, a whopping over 50,000 jobs. Our friends in Canada also benefit with more than 32,000 Ontario jobs dependent on the Soo locks. In recent weeks, Americans have become hyper-aware of the term supply chain as we've watched disruption of the West Coast. Well, the steel industry has its own supply chain right here on the Great Lakes, and it is critically important that it is not to be disrupted. The new large lock at the Soo will provide redundancy and resiliency for the big vessels that make up the iron ore supply chain. This investment will ensure that the steel industry, auto manufacturers, and agricultural exporters have a waterway that is reliably open for commerce. Finally, I'd like to commend our local Congresswoman, Representative Marcy Kaptur, for her advocacy in support of this project. As chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Energy and Water Development Subcommittee, she plays a critical role in securing federal funds for construction and moving the project forward toward completion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, and a great segue to my presentation talking about the Great Lakes Congressional Delegation and how this project actually came to fruition. Lake Cares Association and its members operate what I refer to as bipartisan ships. That's right, our ships are indeed bipartisan. And this was truly a bipartisan effort to get this lock moving in the right direction. And I should apologize in advance to the elected officials that I will probably either neglect to mention or will not give their appropriate due. But this is really a key to how we get this moving. And I'm going to mention several of them who played critical parts. The first, and certainly one of the most important, is the late, great Congressman Jim Oberstar, from a Democrat from the great state of Minnesota, who championed this project and also critically made it full federally funded in an authorization bill. That happened in 2007. That was key to moving this project along and did away with the local cost share. Next, again, may rest in peace, is the great senator from the state of Michigan, Carl Levin. Carl Levin at the time was the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and it was him that was the key person to force the Army Corps of Engineers to update their benefit to cost ratio. The previous study had made some inaccurate assumptions, which really resulted in a very flawed BCR, which unfortunately kept the project from moving forward from 1986 until really the last couple of years. Although not a member of Congressman, I would be neglectful if I didn't give former Governor Rick Schneider from the state of Michigan and the entire Michigan State Legislature credit for kicking in $52 million to literally jumpstart the project. There were members within the administration and OMB and the Army Corps that felt that without a local cost share, they not want to support the project. Governor Schneider took that argument right off the table, and $52 million were committed to the project, and the project was moving in the right direction. I have to mention President Trump, and he mentioned the Soo Locks in his speeches no less than 7 times. But that was no accident. That was made possible by 3 key Republican congressmen from the state of Michigan who happened to be in the limousine with the president when he was on his way to give a speech in Macomb County. Those congressmen were Congressman Bergman from the UP, who represents the Sioux District. He was asked what's important, and he mentioned the Soo Locks. Also in the limousine at the time was Congressman Molinar from a landlocked district in the state of Michigan that understood the importance of this project, not just to the state, but to the entire Great Lakes region. Also a key appropriator, who, along with Congressman Joyce, a Republican from Ohio, provided the complement to Congressman Capter in the Appropriations Committee. Also in that limousine with the president was Congressman Mitchell from the Macomb County area. Senator Stabenow from the state of Michigan was also critical to moving this project forward from her leadership position, not within the Democratic Party alone, but also from her leadership position in the Great Lakes Task Force. She was committed to the effort from the beginning. In fact, she's the last remaining elected official who was at the launching or the groundbreaking ceremony in 2009. So Senator Stabenow early on has been a great supporter. As mentioned by Thomas earlier, Marcy Kaptur, perhaps no greater champion, who was critically placed in the Energy and Water Appropriations Committee and has either been ranking member or the chair since this project has really started moving in the right direction. She also is a co-chair of the Great Lakes Congressional Task Force. She's held hearings at the Soo Locks. She sponsored congressional visits to the Soo Locks. As Thomas noted, she recognized the importance of the Soo Locks not just to Toledo, but to the entire Great Lakes region. So Marcy Kaptur to this day continues to add money to the Army Corps projects lists. They're not earmarks, but she provides additional money to the Corps and encourages them in a very strong and politically savvy way to make sure that they fund the Soo Lock projects through their work plan with the additional money that's provided by the Energy and Waters Appropriations Subcommittee. Finally, and the members of the Great Lakes Task Force and the leadership, because this really was a bipartisan issue and it took the entire Great Lakes region. Senator Klobuchar from the state of Minnesota, a champion and a leader among the Great Lakes delegation. Senator Stabenow is the co-chair. As I mentioned earlier, she's been a huge champion. Senator Young from Indiana. Thomas mentioned all the jobs from the state of Indiana that matter. Senator Young is a co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force and a champion in this project. Senator Portman, again, a leader from the Great Lakes delegation and from the great state of Ohio, and the Great Lakes Task Force delegation, recognizes the importance of the jobs to the state of Ohio and throughout the regions. Congresswoman Dingell, a great supporter of this project, a great supporter of the Great Lakes maritime industry, and a co-chair. Congressman Huizenga from the western part of the state of Michigan. Congressman Joyce, also a key appropriator who provided support from the Republican side of the aisle to Congresswoman Capter. And as I mentioned before, Congresswoman Capter, who chairs the Energy and Waters Committee and represents the Toledo area and the Cleveland area as well. So in conclusion, it was a bipartisan effort to build a bipartisan lock to make the movement of bipartisan ships possible. Thank you. Colonel?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Lieutenant Colonel Scott Catalinich, and I am the commander of the Detroit District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I am honored to be here today and to give you an update on our construction progress for the new lock at the Sioux. First, I would like to thank the Great Lakes Seaway Partnership for arranging this event, the National Museum of the Great Lakes, and Mr. Steve Fisher for hosting, Mr. Mark Barker for speaking on the importance of the Sioux locks, Mr. Thomas Winston for highlighting the economic impacts of the Sioux locks, Mr. Jim Weekly for recognizing our congressional advocates, and then coming up, Mr. Paul Lamar for introducing the posters, and Mr. Chris Gilchrist who will explain how the public can obtain these posters. I would also like to thank our Great Lakes navigation stakeholders. They have been outstanding supporters for a new lock, and we are very grateful for our strong relationship. I have been so impressed with the true passion our Great Lakes navigation stakeholders have for this system and specifically the Sioux locks. As you know, the new lock at the Sioux is vital to our economy, to the Great Lakes shipping industry, and to U.S. manufacturing. The Detroit District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has diligently been preparing to build a new lock at the Sioux since its authorization all the way back in 1986. In 2009, we received $17 million in appropriations to begin some work, and in 2010 and 11, we were able to deepen the downstream channel and place coffer cells on both the upstream and downstream ends of the existing Sabin lock, closing off that antiquated lock, which opened in 1919 and has been in inactive status for 32 years now. After completing the economic validation study and the project being reauthorized in 2018, we again started receiving construction funds in the 2019 work plan, and we were off to the races. To date, the project has received over $411 million to include the $52 million from the state of Michigan. This last fiscal year, our allocation funded construction management for both the upstream channel deepening and upstream approach walls, continued design of the new lock chamber, and roughly $110 million for our upcoming award of the new lock chamber construction contract. This fiscal year, our capability is $480 million. This includes funding to complete the chamber design, manage construction of the approach walls, and award a contract for the new lock chamber. The current cost estimate for the overall project is $1.478 billion. As many of you are aware from our quarterly briefs, we are managing this mega project in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 is upstream channel deepening and consists of deepening the upstream channel to 30 feet to accommodate modern vessels. The Corps of Engineers awarded the Phase 1 contract in January 2020 to Trade West Construction of Nevada, and they are scheduled to complete their work this next year. The contract includes removal of both bedrock and overburden material in the channel. The contractor is mechanically removing the material using a device called the eccentric ripper. When complete, over 250,000 cubic yards of bedrock and overburden material will have been removed from the channel and placed on the northwest pier, which is located directly adjacent to the deepening area. Our placement of material here is strategic, as the taller pier will provide a much-needed windbreak for vessels. Phase 2 is upstream approach walls and consists of rehabilitating the channel walls, concrete caps, mooring bollards, electrical, and lighting to the west of the future lock. The Corps of Engineers awarded the Phase 2 contract to Cocosine Alberici in September 2020. The contractor began work this past spring and is scheduled to be complete in the year 2024. We are using several different methods to rehabilitate the approach walls. The scope includes installing 1,900 linear feet of steel sheet pile cells, 2,100 feet of steel Z-pile for transition walls and faced walls, and 570 linear feet of concrete-faced H-pile wall. We will also be updating lighting and cap repairs along the west center pier. The contractor built a concrete batch plant directly on site and has placed over 8,600 cubic yards of concrete to date. They had 120,000 tons of rock delivered to the project site, and they have already placed 89,000 tons. Both Phase 1 and Phase 2 contractors are making great progress, as you can see from these photos. Phase 3 is construction of the new lock chamber itself. The new lock will be 1,200 feet long, 110 feet wide, and 32 feet deep, matching the dimensions of our existing Poe lock, and providing a great deal of resilience and redundancy to the Sioux Locks complex. We completed the 100% design package in August, and we are working hard to be able to award a contract in February and facilitate contractor mobilization this spring. As you know, the weather, especially in the winter, can be extremely harsh up at the Sioux. We anticipate completion by fall of 2030, but we are optimistic that with good weather, we may be able to beat that. One thing that I'm just absolutely proud of is the enterprise-wide effort to deliver this project. The Corps of Engineers project delivery team isn't just from the Detroit district. It actually consists of many districts, to include Detroit, Louisville, Nashville, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, St. Louis, and Huntington, as well as the Corps' Inland Navigation Design Center and Cost Engineering Mandatory Center of Expertise. We are using state-of-the-art tools to perfect our design of the new lock to include virtual reality and 3D Revit models. These models have been invaluable, helping us streamline the design process and ensure an efficient operating system. For example, we actually had our lock operators use the 3D models to help us improve sight lines from the operating shelters. And we determined the need for additional lock floor catch basins and miter gate tieback recesses. This is awesome technology. We are also designing to integrate safer technologies into the new lock chamber to include the potential for hands-free mooring. With dynamic units that reach out and grab the vessels instead of tying vessels off to the lock using lines, hands-free mooring will reduce the dangerous task of line handling. The new lock will have 4 units on the north wall and 3 units on the south wall. Although we wouldn't be able to use hands-free mooring throughout the entire year due to ice conditions, it could potentially increase both throughput and safety for a significant portion of the shipping season. While the latest projections estimate the total cost for the new lock at the Soo to be over $1.4 billion, we will have greater certainty on cost once we award our Phase 3 contract in February. In total, construction will take approximately 8 to 10 years. Based on our latest regional economic modeling estimate, at the peak of construction, the new lock project will support over 1,200 jobs annually. Additionally, the project will use more than 1.4 million tons of limestone or granite, 112,000 tons of American-made cement, and 25,000 tons of American-made steel. Thank you again for inviting me to give this brief update on our progress to date. I will tell you that as an Army officer, I am required to move from assignment to assignment quite frequently. However, this assignment has brought me back to my home state of Michigan. I grew up visiting the Great Lakes, watching freighters, and I recall as a child being taken by my parents to Sault Ste. Marie and just standing in awe as those freighters went through the locks. It is absolutely a privilege and an honor to be back here today, serving on this team and working with all of you to deliver this absolutely critical piece of infrastructure to our nation. At this time, I would like to turn your attention to Mr. Paul Lamar from the Port of Monroe, who will introduce what we are here for today, these beautiful posters. Thank you.
Thank you. The first time I transited the Soo locks aboard a lake freighter, I was 6 months old, aboard the Regal motor vessel Benson Ford. I was unaware that I was surrounded by a place that I would revere and seek to return to for the rest of my life. As we stand here today, in the presence of industry and community, and the shadow of history and hope of prosperity, we reflect on the bond that exists between steel and spirit, between people and places. Today we celebrate the Soo locks and all that they represent, past, present, and future. The Soo locks have brought us here, not here as a place, but us here as a nation. At one time moving more vessels than the Panama and Suez canals combined, the Soo locks have and will continue to serve as the vein of industry and ingenuity that lift our vessels, our commerce, and our hopes. They could be called an engineering wonder of the world, one of history's most critical and lasting foundations. It is then only fitting that we can give a piece of the Soo locks back to the public who built and sustains them, and to do so at the National Museum of the Great Lakes, the gathering place of our freshwater memories, the institution of our collective archive, the capital of Great Lakes maritime history. The Soo locks are larger than life. They connect cargo, commerce, and community in a way that can only be described as eternal. We are driven by nostalgia, sights and smells, memories and mementos, with a feel that is a throwback to the posters of the national parks in the 1930s. We present to you 3 commemorative creations, not for a national park, but rather our national monument. May they hang with pride in children's bedrooms, classrooms, and corporate offices across the inland seas. May they bring a sense of eternal pride, hope, and prosperity to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Great Lakes Seaway Partnership's lasting tribute to our Soo locks. To highlight the 3 posters very quickly, you see one of our classic Lakers entering the MacArthur Lock. She is representative of not only what you would have seen in wartime transiting the Soo Locks, but that you still see today. You see one of our newer lake freighters upbound in the current Poe Lock and Great Lakes cruising, a critical part of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system's future. And of course, the locks in their entirety in the new Poe-size lock with an interlake steamship vessel, the Mark W. Barker, I would imagine, rising to Lake Superior. We thank you so much for all being here today, and I'd like to introduce Chris Gilchrist, who is the Executive Director of the National Museum of the Great Lakes and my good friend.
Thank you, Paul. On behalf of the National Museum of the Great Lakes, its board, staff, volunteers, and worldwide membership, I would like to thank Steve Fisher and all of the presenters here today for holding this press conference at our facility. The National Museum of the Great Lakes is dedicated to the preservation and dissemination of the history of this continent's most precious resource, our Great Lakes. Understanding the history of our Great Lakes is critical to understanding the political, economic, and social history of both the United States and Canada. This is our business, and although many will look at museums and historical organizations as something other than businesses, our shared history is the product we sell. As a business, having products like these beautiful, one-of-a-kind posters that are featured here today to sell to our customers that come through the door or that visit our website is a wonderful business opportunity for our museum. As a business attempting to flourish in a highly competitive market, products such as these make generating revenue from our store operations so much easier. Thank you to Steve Fisher and the Great Lakes Seaway Partnership for allowing our museum to sell these works of art, which support not only an important revenue stream here at the museum, but tell a critically important story of the Soo Locks as part of our national historical experience. You can purchase these posters by visiting the museum store here in Toledo at the National Museum of the Great Lakes, or by ordering these posters from our website at nmgl.org. Thank you so much.
On behalf of the Great Lakes Seaway Partnership, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Eric Kogelschatz from Shark and Minnow. We want to start off the media roundtable now. So there are a few people joining us online, also a few people here in person. So I'd love to start with the people here today. Does anyone have a question? And actually, why don't we bring up the speakers, if you don't mind? Actually, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind standing over here for the live stream, sorry. All right. Yes, please.
Yeah, Tom Henry from the Toledo Blade. There's been, discussion, given what's happened on the West Coast, about trying to make the Great Lakes a little bit more accessible for containerized shipments, and I just wondered if maybe, Lieutenant Colonel and anybody would care to explain how the locks might, if other docks could become, or other ports could become more accessible, like Cleveland and Monroe is in the process of becoming, how that could, fit into something like that.
Yeah, I think I actually could take this one. I will tell you, first of all, that ports like Toledo were the model for many of us to follow.
Yeah, let's do that.
With regards to containerization and growth of Seaway cargo within the system, I think that we're very well positioned to be a pipeline for domestic and European goods coming into the system. One of the things that a lot of folks don't realize is the fact that the vessels that are sitting off the West Coast are actually bringing thousands of containers with goods from China coming into our economy. One thing that we are very proud to talk about with this project and the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway system as a whole, as we are working with our trading partners in Europe, Canada, and domestically to bolster infrastructure within the boundaries of the United States themselves. So this project is the critical component to connect the upper and lower lakes and bolster our domestic system.
I think there's a lesson out on the West Coast. They have a supply chain that did not have resiliency, and we're seeing it every day. This project is about ensuring resiliency for our supply chain, which isn't about Chinese goods coming here to the United States. It's about domestic manufacturing and American jobs. And we're working to ensure with the Corps of Engineers, with our legislators, that our domestic supply chain here in the United States, the steel, auto supply chain, has resiliency so that we never are in the situation that the West Coast is in right now.
Could I follow up quickly? The concept of diversifying the goods, I mean, our goods are mostly iron ore and grain and steel products, but do you anticipate with the improvements to the locks and upcoming improvements to ports that the type of goods that are shipped might be more diversified?
Absolutely. I think, as Paul indicated, a lot of the ports, Cleveland, Duluth, Monroe, Toledo, are always working to diversify their cargo base. The ports that are examining container shipping as part of that diversification are working through issues related to breaking into that cargo market. It requires special provision facilities from U.S. Customs. It requires special equipment and special investments on shoreside infrastructure. So a number of ports are in fact working on that kind of diversification if it makes sense for their community and for the businesses that are present in their communities.
When you talk about cargo diversity, there's nothing more evident than Mr. Barker's company, Air Lake Steamship, which not only hauls the staple products that you see around the Great Lakes today, but also passengers on the SS Badger, trucks on the SS Badger, and also any cargo you could possibly think of on the Pure Marquette. It is them planning for the future, coupling that with the construction of the first new vessel in 4 years is a sure sign that we are looking to the future and planning on not being a one-cargo system.
Please.
Leonard Fleming, Detroit News. You mentioned Michigan's contribution at, I think, over $50 million. What about some of the other states as well as Canada? What's been their contributions as well?
So initially there was a cost-sharing mechanism among the states, and the Great Lakes Commission was considered the local sponsor. That was deemed no longer necessary in 2007 when Congressman Oberstar authorized full federal funding. The state of Michigan, again, to Governor Snyder's credit, recognized the challenge within OMB and the administration and contributed money to jumpstart that project. Other states that had contributed to the Great Lakes Commission money, and we actually lobbied other states to try and supplement what Michigan had done, and we were unsuccessful in that process. And I think part of the logic was we were being so successful at the federal level that the other states recognized that what Michigan had done, much to the governor's credit, was enough. And your next question was Canada. Canada pays nothing. Canada gets a free ride to the Sulaks. Canada gets a free ride to a lot of U.S. infrastructure. And that's just kind of the way it is. And you could probably tell by the tone of my voice I'm not really happy about that. And we should talk about icebreaking and how Canada gets a free ride on the U.S. icebreaking fleet as well. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today, sir. So.
What are the challenges to getting this project done on time? If anyone can chime in on that. Because you're looking at an 8 to 10 year time frame, I believe.
Yes, that's right. The project is estimated to be complete by 2030. And really, I think the largest challenge that we'll have right now is weather. Harsh weather conditions up there in the wintertime. And that really just goes to underscore the importance of having a new Sioux lock. Right now, what we do is we have a period during the wintertime, we call it winter work, where we do all the required maintenance on that PO lock. Make sure that that lock is ready and operational and good to go throughout the rest of the next shipping season. And having a new Sioux lock that has the same dimensions of the PO and able to accommodate those largest of freighters on the lakes will give us a great deal of resiliency and the ability to increase the time periods in which we do necessary repairs or maintenance or rehabilitation throughout the year.
If I may add to that, the Colonel, being the good soldier that he is, couldn't talk about funding. And I think there is a threat, and I think it's efficient funding level. But there's good news there. In the FY22 appropriations bill, Congresswoman Capter, again to her credit, added additional money for general, for which the Sioux Lock would be eligible to compete for. Also in the infrastructure bill, when that passes, I don't want to say if, but when that passes, there's another large chunk of money for which the Sioux Lock could compete for. And between the FY22 appropriations and the money that's available for the infrastructure, I believe we could fully fund this lock with those two additional pieces and get it funded through fruition. There's a efficient funding mechanism, which means that if the Corps is funded at the level that they can execute, it will save the project over $100 million as opposed to the inefficient funding process. So, you know, weather, absolutely, Colonel, you're right on the money. That's always a risk in Michigan and the Great Lakes region. And two, at the federal level, funding is always a risk. But I'm optimistic on both of those fronts, sir.
When did the project officially start?
Well, 2009, when they did the groundbreaking, it was August, and it was very cold in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan that day. And really, the latest round, when it really got serious, was when they started doing the dredging project. Colonel, anything I need to add to that? 2020 was when the dredging project started. And I also have to say that the Detroit News did a great job in keeping this project front and center, as did the Toledo Blade. But I remember driving to the Sioux for a visit and seeing literally a front page story on the Detroit News about this, and that was probably a good 5 years plus. So, you know, in addition to our congressional delegation, the media in the Great Lakes has kept this project front and center.
Just to clarify, the dredging depth, what's
It's being dredged to 30 feet.
30 feet.
Do you anticipate other parts of the shipping cable being dredged to 30 feet? I mean, here it's in Toledo, I think it's 26 feet.
So let me help you, Colonel. So the controlling depth for the Sioux Lock, for the system, kind of goes back and forth between the lake levels. I think it's currently the lower pool or the upper pool, and sometimes it's the rock cut. I think the designed system is, I think it's 27 feet is the design system for the entire Great Lakes system. Obviously, at the Sioux Lock, it's going to be a little bit deeper for the approach, and you need a safety factor there for it's a phenomenon called squat, where if you're too close to the bottom and you're going too fast, it'll actually create a Venturi effect and it'll suck the vessel down. So the Corps is building in a safety factor by dredging to 30 feet, and that also matches the PO. It's really important to emphasize this is a resiliency issue. When we landed on the moon, the Apollo project, every system except one had a resilient or a redundant system, and that only system that didn't have redundancy was lifted off the landing module from the moon, and it was only used once. So resiliency is an engineering design, and really it's been designed into this system, and we've lacked that since the PO was built.
Well, that leads to something I was going to ask, just for clarification. Is the main purpose of
I would say yes to all the above, but I would add the additional resiliency factor. So obviously, a critical piece of infrastructure is always going to be a risk. We had 10,000 troops stationed there at the Sioux, and we've seen an increase in what we call unscheduled outages. And again, the Corps does a tremendous job of responding, but a fix on demand response is not going to work for a catastrophic failure. So it's about efficiency, as you noted, Tom. Efficiency is a key factor. It's about giving the Corps flexible maintenance process, as again you mentioned, and I'm adding the resiliency, and I hate the word redundancy because redundancy gives the impression that you don't need it. It's really a resilience issue, and it's a resiliency for the entire navigation system because the Sioux Lock is it's a critical piece, and the DHS report talked about how they called it the perils of efficiency, and they have been so efficient at the Sioux that it's created a critical point of failure. And what we need to do is remove that risk factor. It's all about risk management, sir.
And I can't remember going to my notes offhand right now, but I'm sure this is an easy question for anyone to answer. The 10,000 jobs that the Sioux Locks now create for Northwest or support for Ohio, not Northwest Ohio, but Ohio, and the 13,000 for Michigan and 32,000 for Ontario, if I have that straight.
Yes, sir.
Could you, well, first, do you anticipate more jobs for Michigan, Ohio, and Ontario because of this? And second, could you give some examples of the types of jobs that are supported?
You want me to take that? So I would say yes to all the above. Thomas had some excellent numbers, and I think you got them all correct from my memory. And some of those sources of those reports validate that. But again, those were Great Lakes centric. And look at the national supply chain. The DHS report that I mentioned cites 11 million jobs that are dependent on the Sioux Locks. And that was if there was a 6-month outage, 11 million Americans would be unemployed. Michigan's unemployment rate would skyrocket to 22%. In the Great Recession, it peaked at 15%. The other challenge is, keep in mind, this would be a resource-based recession. We've never experienced anything like it. With the closest thing we've experienced is the oil embargo in the mid-'70s, right? With a financial crisis, the Fed can inject money and deal with the money supply to resolve that situation. With a resource-based recession, you've got to get the Sioux Lock up and running. So really the Great Lakes navigation system in general is about 235, and those are including Canadian 1,000 jobs. But the bigger number is the 11 million Americans, and it's 3 to 5 million Mexicans and Canadians that also depend on the supply chain that's enabled by the Sioux Locks. Amazingly, Texas and California have a significant number of jobs, again, based on that DHS report, that depend on the Sioux Locks. And I would be willing to bet that the Texas and California delegation don't understand their dependence on a piece of Michigan infrastructure.
What type of jobs?
Manufacturing, automotive. Mark, you wanted to get in here?
One comment is, I think the plant right here at Cliffs that Thomas talked about, you wouldn't build a plant if you didn't believe in the supply chain and in the system ability to function for the long haul. And so I think the best example of adding jobs to this system is literally, a couple thousand yards down the street. And that you have to understand when you do investment like that, what are the risks to your whole system, and supply being number one. So I think that's a great example.
And the initial impact of that is 150 jobs at the direct reduction plant. An additional 100 vessels coming into the Port of Toledo, specifically as it relates to that $1 billion operation. And over 2 million more tons of cargo coming in. That's just the tip of the iceberg there, and we expect that continued diversification and growth happening, particularly with investment happening at the Sioux Locks, will only have a ripple effect throughout the entire Great Lakes.
I know one other thing too, you guys had mentioned that this was a an area where the military took efforts to defend during World War II. And I visited the locks when I was young, much like many of you, and you all know now that if you go up there, as I did a couple of years ago, it's not like when we were little kids where you could just walk up right to the waterfront. It's a real hard security after 9/11. And I'm just wondering if you can put it into perspective in terms of a national security. I don't want to say it's a threat, but what does this mean for national security, and how are we prepared to defend?
Colonel, you want to take that, or you want me to?
I'll do part of it. How's that?
Yes, sir.
Well, absolutely, it's important to the nation, and we've described that. But if we look at the domestic supply of iron ore, so much of that is coming from northern Minnesota. And it has to go across the Sioux Locks there and do that drop of 21 feet across the rapids so that it can get down to the lower Great Lakes and get to this many steel mills down here in the Midwest. And so it is absolutely important to the nation. We do take physical security of our sites very seriously. Thank you.
And I would only add that the physical security that the Corps does has been tested, and the Corps has proved successful. There's been some minor incursions, and I think every time the Corps has responded and stopped that. Nothing major, nothing I'm sure that would be newsworthy, but trust me, don't test them. And I would also add to Thomas's comment about Cleveland Cliffs. That is displacing some offshore pig iron, right? So they used to import scrap and pig iron from offshore, and now Cleveland Cliffs is using American-sourced iron ore as a feedstock for the electric arc furnaces on the Great Lakes. It's a tremendous move, and as Mark Barker pointed out, they wouldn't have taken that move if they didn't believe long-term in the Great Lakes navigation system and its security and its redundancy. Paul?
I think another good point is that the other modes of transportation cannot meet
that transportation need. So in wartime, a single point of failure with over 90% of the nation's iron ore and steel producing capability going through that lock system, if that were to fail, you have lost the production of American steel in wartime. It is critically important to know, because the DHS study, as well as the Corps study, would note that the other modes, rail, truck, etc., cannot meet that need that Great Lakes maritime shipping can.
There was a question online regarding the jobs and how you'll be able to work through the harsh winters of northern Michigan. If someone want to take that question.
Hats and mittens.
Need to be a construction job?
Yeah.
Speak to how construction's handled during the winter months. If the workers take a break during that, or
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. Well, yes, there's definitely construction seasons. And so we work so that, right now we're working very hard so that this next contract that we are able to award, we're able to award it early enough so that contractors can mobilize and get there in the spring and be able to start and have that long construction season. But yes, when we get into the wintertime, there are periods of time when there are certain things that you just simply cannot do. Right? When the temperature drops to a certain point, you can't be placing concrete, right? And so there's just certain limitations based upon the location of this place. And that kind of goes back to my statement of weather being one of the most critical aspects at this point of being able to continue on timeline and be on progress.
If I can add, could you also talk about how the new lock will allow you to do maintenance on the PO during the season as opposed to...
Oh, absolutely. So I touched earlier on winter work, and that is absolutely something to see. If you ever have the opportunity to get up to the Sioux and see where we have to dewater the lock and be able to get in there and do the maintenance in the wintertime, that is some tough working conditions for our folks. And we've got some incredible workers in the Corps of Engineers who do that maintenance. Just as we have some incredible contractors, working on this new project. But with the ice that they have to work through and remove and use steam to remove so that they can do the work that they need to do, it's some really, really tough conditions. But having this new lock, right, will mean that we don't have to do all of that work in a short period of time every year, when according to the Code of Federal Regulations, we have that period of time that we shut down, and we do not have shipping going through the locks. Right now, we're trying to cram everything into that time period, but with another lock here, that will open up much more possibilities throughout the entire year to be able to do maintenance, whatever it is that comes up. Great point.
Colonel, I had another question too. There's been a lot of discussion, over the years about climate change, which would, obviously, a warmer climate would benefit your construction here, but still, whether federal infrastructure, which takes so long to do, to the degree that climate change projections have been engineered into them. We've had, as you know, the eras of low water and high water here in the lakes that we've been contending with. And I know the military is much more involved with climate change than a lot of people realize because of the potential national security issues. But I just wondered if you could address to what degree climate change has been or has not been engineered into, what's going to be happening with the new law.
Well, we definitely look at what the climate is, and the focus is sustainability for our projects, right? We want our projects to be sustainable and to last for many, many years. So earlier we were talking about the POLOC and how this is a resilient system. I won't use the term redundant. Resilient system to assist with the POLOC, right? The POLOC was opened in 1968, so it's already quite aged. And you mentioned the lake levels on the Great Lakes. The Detroit District of the Army Corps of Engineers has a hydrology and hydraulics team, and part of what we do is we monitor what are those lake levels, and we have data that goes back all the way to 1918 that shows what those lake levels are every single month on all of the Great Lakes, and we post that regularly to our website and share it with everyone, academia, other government agencies, etc. And so we absolutely look at those conditions, what we might expect the lake levels to be, and there are studies going on in academia now even as to trying to forecast what the ice might look like on the Great Lakes in the future. But all of that information does come in, and those are things that we consider when we are taking a look at our engineering designs.
All right, I think we have just time for one more question. Anyone else online or in person?
If not, if I can follow up on the Colonel's comment and to supplement, Tom, it's resiliency is the key. And what we're seeing with the polar vortex, for example, is we're seeing more extremes. And the flooding that occurred in February this year of the St. Clair Detroit River system is a perfect example of how a quick Arctic event can impact the Great Lakes, and we need the systems to be resilient. It's also another perfect example of why we need additional Coast Guard icebreaking assets, because they clearly did not answer the bell to the men and women of the St. Clair region. So thanks for asking the icebreaking question, Tom.
All right, well, thank you on behalf of the Great Lakes Seaway Partnership for joining us today.